Hey guys, first I'd like to say sorry that I never put anything on this. That's gonna change. Um, well, I have put things on, but at such an irregular rate. So I'm gonna change that, and I'm gonna start producing a lot more stuff and putting it on here. This was due to a number of factors, mostly like technical stuff, really. My old computer was like really laggy, and so like making a lot of the tracks just wasn't working or doing anything. Like this just was too it was older, but I got a new computer, and so here we are. Another thing, I've updated some support pages. So I redid my Patreon page because I don't think I understood how Patreon worked the first time around. I think I thought of it more like GoFundMe, but that's not what it is. So I revamped that. I also got Subscribestar for people who maybe aren't as comfortable using Patreon after some recent changes they've made, or other controversies they've been in. But I'll have both up. I really appreciate the support. I want to do a lot of really cool things on here, putting up my own compositions, of course, but also doing a lot of kind of music theory or composition videos, a lot of like analysis videos, kind of orchestration tips, any kind of stuff like that, or videos like this one, which is going to be a book review. Also, don't know if people know this, but I'm living in China.
China.
I'm living in Beijing at the moment. I think it would be really cool to start a series on how to compose for instruments outside the Western canon. And being in China, I think it would be a great place to start if I began with a lot of Chinese instruments and how do we write for them, because there's really not a lot of material in English. There's some, but not to the extent that you would find, books or videos or what have you for Chinese instruments. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get to it. Alright, today we have a book review. Well, two. It's more of a book comparison. First up, we have Musical Composition, Craft and Art by Alan Belkin. And then next we have The Fundamentals of Music Composition by Arnold Schoenberg. Okay, let's get down to the fundamental stuff here. First off, let's just quick review who these guys are, in case you don't know. I'm sure you know Schoenberg, but if you don't, quick recap. Arnold Schoenberg was a very, very famous Austrian composer who was part of the Second Viennese School, the guys who kind of made 8-tonal or 12-tone music. He is highly regarded as one of the most influential composers in history, but definitely if you're talking about the 20th century, he's like in the top of the most influential. Alan Belkin. If you've been looking for like a lot of help with like composition on YouTube, you probably know this guy's name. He's a professor, of course a composer, but he's a music educator who's been teaching at the University of Montreal for about 30 years now. He's also, and if you don't know about his like YouTube stuff, check it out. But he has an excellent online kind of composition education program that he's been developing for a long time now. So for other good resources for music composition, check out his YouTube page and his website. It's full of amazing stuff. Links are below. Now I know you're thinking, okay, wait, well, let's talk about the content. Well, hold your horses there, man, because we got to talk about the actual writing style of these books, because when you have an education book, you want to learn from it, and if the language sucks or the prose is just too hard to understand, it's going to slow you down some. Now, that is kind of, for me, a big issue with the Schoenberg. Okay, they even touch on this in the kind of the foreword by the publishing company, and to be honest, I think they need to publish a new edition.
You don't say.
You don't say. What they read here is From the beginning, the book was conceived in English rather than in Schoenberg's native German. This created many problems of terminology and language structure. He rejected most of the traditional terminology in both languages, choosing instead to borrow or invent new terms. For example, a whole hierarchy of terms developed to differentiate the subdivisions of a piece. Part is used non-restrictively as a general term. Other terms, in order of size or complexity, include motive, unit, element, phrase, for-sentence, after-sentence, segment, division. These terms used consistently, and their meanings are self-evident. Other special terms are explained in the text. I have chosen to keep some of the flavor of Schoenberg's English construction when it is expressively effective, even though it may be at variance with the idiomatic. So here, I'm just going to quick show you a few examples of what I mean by kind of Schoenberg's linguistic, how would you describe it? Just decadence, maybe. He uses a word, piquant, which I believe is French. Let's take a look. Yep. I had no idea what this word is. Having a pleasantly sharp taste. No, it's not that one. Pleasantly stimulating or exciting to the mind. Okay. I consider myself to be pretty well read. That was the first time I've ever heard piquant used in a book. Another weird French term that he picks up is an aperçu. Is that how you say it right?
Aperçu.
Oh. Aperçu. There's a lot of words that we could just swap for that English already has that we don't really need to know. Also, he loves, for some reason, I don't know if this was an old spelling, but I think it's just Schoenberg spelling words weird that he doesn't say, he says, connection. Connection. I don't know how that'd be. Connection?
Nein, hast du nicht mich verstanden? Es ist nicht connection, ich hatte Connection gesagt.
Speaking of German terms, he also has a few extra ones. One that you'll see prominently is the word durchführen, which means to lead through. Although I actually like Schoenberg's reasoning for this. In the development section for most kinds of extended pieces, whether it be like rondo form or not rondo form, scherzo form, sonata, anything where you kind of need to make a really good transition. He doesn't like the term development because he makes an argument that many times what you would call the development section, actually the motivic stuff doesn't actually evolve per se. It's more just leading and avoiding certain things or leading to certain things to get us to the next section. So I actually do enjoy the fact that he came up with a term to describe that kind of abstract, not abstract, that kind of thought process that no, it's not really this. Okay, one term that I think is really confusing, upbeat harmony. Like, you know when you say you have an upbeat chord? That's, well, I can play a little example. I can't think of anything right now, but I'm sure if we, sat down, I think we could come up with a better phrase than upbeat harmony, because the word upbeat just still has too much rhythmic connotation. So even if you're talking about a chord that is harmonically upbeat harmony coming before another chord, but that first chord is already on a downbeat coming to a resolution on an upbeat, then it's a bit confusing. I understand what he's trying to communicate, and it's actually really good if you can kind of de-sort the kind of problems in your head. I don't know, I just wish there was a better term, like preparatory harmony. I think that would be something I prefer better, because so looking back at it, I noticed that there was a bit of confusion on my part of what he meant by upbeat harmony. I think preparatory harmony is still a better term, but basically, upbeat harmony specifically refers to the kind of harmony that prepares us for the entry of the next section of a piece. So, like a recapitulation of like a ternary movement or something like that. So, to give you an example of this, in the book he references a segment of a Schumann waltz. So, in this example of the waltz, it's in a ternary form. It's ABA form. So we've already gone past the first A section by this point, and now we're at the end of the B section. And these 2 or 3 chords in the beginning of this segment are the upbeat harmony because they lead us back to the recap of the second A section. So in the first 3 chords that you see on the example, it's the end of the B section. These chords, as you can see, are actually not part of the F major scale. That's because this B section, like most B sections, is in a different key. Well, in this case, it's still in the key of F, but we're in a parallel key. We're in the F minor, and then we pivot through the upbeat harmony back to the normal F major A section harmony. So once again, he's not talking about any kind of like preparatory harmony, like I said before, where it's just leading to whatever next chord. It's specifically about transitioning from one major section to another, to the like recapitulation of another major section of a piece. I hope that cleared things up. I'll quick play that Schubert example right now. If we compare Schoenberg's writing, which like I said before, I think they really should make a new update to the version because it's still really old sounding.
You don't say!
In comparison, Belkin's is really, really straightforward, uses clear, concise language. Anybody older definitely could pick it up, but definitely anybody my age and younger, I think. Obviously, given enough music education, this is aimed at college age composition students and up. So, but it's both of these books are applicable to this one, not so much for beginners. This one you could say is good for kind of people in the late beginning stages, early intermediate stages of like music theory and composition. But they both, even if you're much more advanced, they still both offer a lot. But Belkin's book, I think, offers way, way, way clearer language. I cannot stress this enough. It just helps transfer concepts much faster when people are just speaking your tongue, So, although I think his language is much clearer, it gets ideas across much faster. I think that's a huge point. But if you can overcome the kind of tediousness of the language, there's a lot of gold nuggets in this mine, okay? So, next thing. The scope of the musical landscape. Now, what do I mean, the scope of the musical landscape? I mean, when you're talking about these books, what kind of musical content are they covering? Well, for Schoenberg's, you're pretty much getting the study of composition in regards to the classical Western repertoire. And that means you're going to be focusing on a lot of music, basically Schoenberg's, like, turn of the 20th century and before that up till Bach. So basically the common practice period, the standard classical romantic kind of writing. So this is good for if you want to definitely study common compositional practices in those kinds of writings, that kind of harmony, that kind of thing. So this is really the book for if you really want to get advanced in the traditional style of composition, in the ways of Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, going into guys like, Wagner, or even up to like Mahler and stuff like that. All that whole range of guys, okay? So this kind of goes in depth into that style, whereas Belkin's book is much more modern in the sense that he covers a vast terrain of kind of musical composition styles, techniques. So partly, you can't blame Schoenberg's book for being outside of that. He was dead in 1950 something. So, but Belkin's definitely covers that ground since his time. So it's a much more. Of course, you're going to get examples from Mozart, those guys, but you're also going to see him talk about modern harmony as well, and all the complexities that brings. He even says as much in the beginning of his book. He says, like, in this book, I attempt to reconcile the varied needs with an approach that is style neutral and focuses on craft. You're getting kind of different types of composition instruction in these books. Well, of course, in Schoenberg's book, he addresses things like texture, melodic contour, articulations, all that kind of stuff, dynamics, color. He talks about it often, but only Belkin's book has information that explains how these things work in a modern contemporary compositional context. A great example of this, in Belkin's book, he has a chapter on cadences and what they are. Anyone with a kind of like basic rudimentary idea about music theory will understand what a cadence is. This is an authentic cadence, this is plagal, that kind of thing. But Belkin's book goes beyond that to talk about kind of how modern, non-traditionally harmonic, maybe even atonal, or, what have you, music can use these elements I described before, like articulation, dynamics, texture, instrumentation, how they can be utilized to create a cadence in their own right. So not in the traditional harmonic sense where we go 5 to 1 or whatever, but in the sense of you're capping off a point in the music to lead to the next point, or an ending, or a lighter transitionary cadence. So using these other elements to make cadences. So overall, Belkin, much more of an applicable book to buy if you're a modern composer, while somebody who wants to kind of focus on the standards might be more interested in Schoenberg. The next thing about the book, I just want to talk about like the outline of the chapters, or how the book's outline, like when you start at the beginning of the book to the end of the book. Here to me, Schoenberg's book is actually a lot more organized. Maybe it's that German in him, or Austrian in him, I guess, that makes this book a little bit more Ordnung muss sein. There must be order. So he gets everything laid down in a very logical structure. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first is construction of themes. The second focuses on small forms. And then the third focuses on large forms. So you really feel like there's a coherent structure. You're starting from, building. You start from basically describing and understanding what a motive is, how you develop motives into phrases, into themes, antecedent, consequent, and then just a few other things related to the actual manipulation of musical ideas in the small setting, in the very detailed setting. And then he goes on to, after you kind of have learned about those concepts, to go down into the form areas of music. So we're talking about, okay, now how do we actually organize all these materials? And then he starts with small forms, going into large forms. So it's a very bottom-up, top-down, however you want to describe it. It's a very cohesive, coherent structure of the book. Belkin's book starts in a similar way, but I feel it kind of like derails in a few spots where it'll go, okay, we're talking about motives, phrases, cadences, blah, blah, blah. But then, similar as Schoenberg's, but in the middle of the book, he just kind of bounces to certain chapters about form, and then he bounces back to more kind of general ideas about connecting music and developing music, and then he bounces back again to talk about more large form structures. in that regard, it's a bit unorganized, and I wish it had. I don't think it's necessarily his fault. It might have been a publishing thing. I just wish it had been laid out in the same way that Schoenberg's has, because I think in terms of the organization of the chapters, it's a lot easier to kind of navigate through. So, as far as the outline of the book is concerned, I give Schoenberg the edge. But, and this is a big but, when we come to the aspect of the presentation of musical excerpts or musical examples, Schoenberg's book is, for me, is kind of a mess. Schoenberg is a bit of a mad lad here, okay? He slaps all of his musical examples kind of, well, I don't know if it's him or the publisher, but they slap all the musical examples at the end of the chapter. So basically, whenever he references something in a chapter, you're constantly like flipping the page, and it's kind of headache-inducing. And of course, most of Schoenberg's examples are from the classical and early Romantic era type of repertoire. But the way he annotates some of the things is a little bit confusing as well, like how some of the motifs are annotated with like the A's and the B's and the C's, and it takes a while. You can understand it, but it took me a while to kind of get my head around it. And then in combination with the flipping, it was just it seemed a bit like a bit of work to actually study some of those examples, where Belkin's is much more straightforward, and I appreciate it immensely. Most of the examples can be found directly next to the text that's talking about it, or at least on the next page, and we're talking about like books that are trying to educate. You want to make your writing and your outline as clear as possible so that people can get the clearest idea as soon as possible. Belkin does a really good job at that. Some are from the repertoire, some are examples that he wrote himself. Probably something from some of his previously written like online materials that he's put up. But nonetheless, he finds really good examples that clearly illustrate the point he's trying to talk about. So, for most of us, Belkin's book would be a better sell, especially if you want to only buy one book to focus on for the time being. However, Schoenberg is a treasure trove of great information as well, if you're willing to brave the page flipping and the connection and Durchführung and all that kind of stuff. But it's worth it, I think. So I give Belkin's musical composition, craft, and art 9 out of 10 kawaii laughs. And I give Schoenberg's Fundamental of Music composition 7 out of 10 John Baker whips. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.